here. Appreciate the presence of you all. And I'm glad to see that we have some people visiting with us who, if you are visiting with us, we do want to encourage you to stay afterwards so we can get a chance to visit you and shake your hand and say hello and make sure that you are greeted warmly. We like visitors and we like people who come back to visit, and so we want to encourage you to come back anytime, but we really want to make sure that everyone knows that tonight is something that we're, well, I don't know if we've done it before, but if we haven't, it'd be a good thing to keep doing. We took a collection for our teachers and with school supplies Thursday, and then gave them out Thursday when we did the luncheon for the teachers. And I think the count got up to 160 or somewhere around that time, around that number. 160 teachers who signed in and to let us know, and we fed them all the baked potatoes and the fixings that they could want and all the good desserts, and it was a really good time, and the teachers really appreciated it, and we appreciate teachers, and we know that there are many of you here in the audience who are teachers, and we know we did a little time to give honor to you last Sunday, and tonight we're going to have a little fellowship time with sandwiches and ice cream and all the things, but it's not just for the teachers. We know that there are many of you who are going to be students, whether going back to A&M or going to college or starting out this year. Some of you here may have kids who this is going to be their first time to go to school, or this is maybe their last year to go to school. I know there's a young man over here smiling about that. A few people some ladies here are smiling about that. We want to make sure that you are sent off prepared spiritually. And so we are going to take some time tonight. We want to honor you. We want to pray over you. We want to be able to give and ask God's blessings upon you. So if you have anything to do with the school, teaching, an aide, coach, student, whatever, please come tonight. Please come to our family night so we can give you a good send-off and prepare you for this year. We know that is important. We know that is very important. I want to mention also, and I do want to make sure we are continuing to pray for Lewis. And while they are asking that we have not too many visitors, I will tell you that Priscilla will be more than happy to visit with you on the phone. Cards are very much welcome. So there's plenty of ways that we can communicate and show our love to the Drennans while Lewis is recovering in the hospital, as well as the rest of those who we know who are struggling right now or ill. I do ask, Michelle's not here, but I do ask that you do please pray for my sister-in-law, Carrie, who is going to have some surgery on Wednesday. Nothing too serious, but surgery is surgery, and surgery is always serious no matter what it is. So please remember her in your prayers. We're continuing our series of lessons on discipleship, and we are about to get done with, by the end of the year, we'll have talked about all 12 apostles. Today, we're going to be looking at a very famous, not because of what he did, but famous because of what he said. We're going to be talking about Thomas today, and I'm going to do my best to refrain from saying his nickname. And the reason why is because I think we, or maybe ministers, preachers, I don't know, teachers, I really wish I knew where this came from. And some people will, duh, Bland, it came from the fact of what he said. I know. But we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We've been talking about a call to discipleship all year long, and we're highlighting each month a disciple. So Thomas is the one who we're going to talk about this morning. And as you go back and look at John in John chapter 20, we're going to be flipping around a little bit, but I got my presentation will allow us to follow along on where we want to go. You know, most of us would consider it an insult if we compared someone, or if we were compared to the disciple known as the doubter. Oftentimes, Thomas is looked at, and when we talk about him, or when he's talked about, we always seem to want to focus on the failure. And for many people, probably in church, that's standard operating procedures. We do a really good job of highlighting failures. And I, for one, well, I'm getting tired of it. I think it's time we started highlighting successes. I think it's time we started talking about, like was done in the auditorium class this morning, the good things. How things have gotten better over the years. How things have gotten a lot better. And so, like I said, I'm going to try to avoid the D word, if you will. But, truth be told, we don't know a whole lot about Thomas. We don't know a whole lot about him at all. Now, we are familiar enough with what that he was a man who had a hard time grasping onto the fact that Jesus did actually arise from the dead and appeared to some of his other disciple friends. In fact, and because of that, we very seldom refer to him as the Apostle Thomas. Instead, we give him a new name. We've renamed him Doubting Thomas. And somehow, this morning, I want us to really focus on overcoming that negative impression about Thomas and allow ourselves to spend some time in his shoes. I want us to see some positive sides of Thomas that I don't think many of us have really focused on. Actually, the Bible gives us very little information about Thomas in the first three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. All we know about Thomas is that his name is listed among the 12, and that's pretty much it. But then John comes along and starts throwing in some bits of information about Thomas that I think we can really appreciate. And the first time we come in contact with Thomas is in John chapter 11. Now, in this episode, everyone knows the word comes out. Jesus gets a message that his best buddy Lazarus is sick and dying. And Jesus does something that I would say many people would say was very abnormal. If you got a message that your friend was sick and dying in the hospital, you would probably do your best to try to drop everything, or stop what you were doing, and go up there and see him. But what does Jesus do? He keeps on working in his ministry. And so he's in Judea, he's in that area, and then later on, another message comes and says, Lazarus is dead. And Jesus turns to his disciples and says, well, I'm going to go see Lazarus. Now, the disciples do something that's very interesting here. The disciples hear this, and they become very upset. And the disciples are troubled, not because Lazarus has passed away. Instead, they want to remind Jesus in no uncertain terms that, Lord, Jesus, do you remember the last time you were in Judea? The last time you were in Judea, the disciples want to remind him, is they tried to kill you. They wanted to take stones and throw at you. And if you go back to Judea, there's a really good chance they might try that again and succeed. And quite frankly, the disciples really tried to stop him. Yes, they were afraid for his life, but I'm pretty sure we might add, they were probably afraid of their own lives as well. So it's important for us to notice here that in none of this story does Christ say, well, buddy, guys, y'all don't have to go. Y'all can just stay right here. Jesus doesn't try to stop them. He doesn't try to encourage them to go with him. There is no demand made by Christ. All Jesus says is, I'm going to see Lazarus. And at any point along the way, Any of the 12 could have spoken up and could have said, I'm not going to Judea. But it's precisely at this moment that Thomas steps up into the light, fully realizing the danger of not returning from Judea. Thomas speaks up, and he says, let us also go that we may die with him. Now, if any of you have a New Living Translation, I love the way the New Living Translation puts this. It says, the New Living Translation says, let's go to and die with Jesus. What a statement that is. What an affirmation of faith. It was clearly an expression of love for Jesus. In essence, he was saying, if the people are going to take up stones and kill Jesus, then they're going to have to throw stones at us. If the people grab a hold of Jesus and they throw him in jail, Thomas is saying, then guess what? They're going to have to throw us in jail too. If they decide to take Jesus and throw him off a cliff, then guess what? We're going to be thrown off the cliff as well. These are incredibly powerful words. Words that should cause us to remember something that Jesus said on another occasion in John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, that he laid down his life for his friends. And so we see that Thomas, in one way, Thomas in many ways loved Jesus so much that he's willing to die or be alongside of Christ if a dangerous threat is taking place. This statement took a lot of courage on the part of Thomas. So instead of calling him Doubting Thomas, maybe we should call him Thomas the Risk Taker. I mean, no one had to spell this out for Thomas. Thomas did the easy math. Last time he was in Judea, they threatened to kill him. And now he's going back. It doesn't take Scooby-Doo to solve this mystery. Thomas is like, that man's going to die. And I love him. Therefore, I'm going to go with him. I'm going to go with him. And he realized that he went to Judah with Jesus. There was a good probability that he was also going to die well. Humanly speaking, it would be impossible for 13 men to stand up against the angry mob with armed stones. But Thomas was willing to take that risk. Why? Because he loved Jesus with all of his heart. And if we love Jesus with all of our heart, guess what, church? We're called to take risks. Think about it. Following Jesus involves a certain amount of risk. It's a risky thing to get up out of your pew and come forward with a concern on your heart or a prayer request. It's a risky thing to get out of the aisle and come forward and say, I'm a sinner and I'm sorry for the things that I've done and I'm accepting Jesus Christ today as my Savior. I want to be baptized. It's a huge risk. I can go one more step further. It is a risk to be involved in committing yourself to be a member of a church. Why? Because it's all good when the church is doing great things, but if the church actually makes a mistake because we're human, or does something wrong, or something is said, or something is not done right, and you're a part of that church, guess what? So there's a risk in becoming a member of the church. It requires a great deal of risk to turn your income over to God and give out of your own paycheck to the church, the needs. There's a risk there. It's a risky matter to tell a colleague or a friend about Jesus. One never knows what that person might think and start calling you names like holy or religious. It's risky to endeavor to commit to a church to grow. It may require doing things differently. It may require occasionally being a friend to a stranger. Risk, risk, risk. Thomas was a risk taker. And if we truly love Jesus, He is the number one man in our life. And we must be willing to take risk. Think about all the men and the women throughout the Bible who were willing to take risk. Moses stood up to one of the greatest military kingdoms in all time at that time period. David, a young shepherd boy who took out a few animals, decided to stand up to a mighty, giant-sized man. It was a risky matter of an uneducated man named Peter to stand up on the day of Pentecost before a massive crowd and deliver his first sermon. It involved risk for Paul to preach in Rome. It was a risk for Martin Luther to nail a copy of his complaint to the church door. It was a risk for Dietrich Bonhoeffer to call Adolf Hitler of Germany a sinful man. No church or individual Christian will grow unless they are willing to take a risk. Thomas is an example of one who did that. Now, the next time we see Thomas is the night of the Last Supper. It was the night that Jesus broke the bread and blessed the cup and gave it to his disciples to remember him. And this was going to be a long, terrible night with a lot of pain, with a lot of torment, with a lot of fear, and a lot of anguish on the cross. And just about the time, an hour before Jesus' death, Jesus shares, he gives the disciples a little bit of insight into what's going to happen next. And we find some beautiful words Jesus uses. Try that again. We find some very beautiful words that Jesus uses to encourage, I got that out right this time, to encourage his disciples. John 14. In the beginning of John 14, there's one of the most greatest statements in the world. Jesus says, "Do not let your heart be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not there, I would have told you. Now I'm going there to build a place for you. And when I've done that, I'm going to come back and I'm going to take you with me so you will be where I am." And then he says, "And you know the way, or the place, of where I'm going." And then we have Thomas, who, I don't know how he did it, but "Excuse me, Jesus, that's a really lovely statement you just made, but I can tell by the rest of these guys in this room, we don't know where you're going." "Where are you going, Jesus?" He breaks into the conversation, not to be rude, but to simply ask a question. And that should tell you a great deal about Thomas. Thomas was not only a risk taker, he was an inquirer. He was a man who considered himself someone who did not have all the answers. Instead, he was an individual who wanted to know more. He wanted to understand what Jesus was talking about. And we desperately need more Christians who are longing, who are hungry, who are starving to know more about Jesus and His Word, and are willing to put the time and the effort into reading His Word, not just hearing what the preacher is talking about on Sunday. We need more Christians who are longing to know more, who are far from being satisfied with knowing Jesus at a superficial level. It wasn't good enough for Thomas, and it shouldn't be good enough for you. He wanted to know more. We all grew up with this song, "More about Jesus would I know, more of His grace to others show, more of His saving fullness see, more of His love who died for me." And we all know the chorus, more about Jesus, more. You can sing, "Jesus, more of His saving fullness see, more of His love died for me." It is that evident that Thomas had not figured everything out. didn't know what Jesus was talking about, and he was not afraid to ask the questions. He was not afraid to make sure he knew what was going on. Thomas loved Jesus, and he wanted to know more about him. And to top it all off, if Jesus was going somewhere, he wanted to be there with him. Makes sense to me. Third time we meet Jesus, it's in chapter 20 of John. It's Resurrection Sunday. The disciples are there. It's in the afternoon, and everyone's gathered around. Everyone but Thomas, which should be a little mini sermon in itself, because you hear, all the disciples are gathered around. Thomas is not there, and Jesus pops in and says, "Peace be with you." And Jesus shows the scars and the holes and everything else. So that mini sermon about Thomas not being there the first time is that if you're not around, you might miss Jesus. If you're not here, and this is not this is a mini sermon about coming to church on Sundays and Wednesdays and Sunday nights. But if you are here, you experience Christ, plain and simple. It's not about coming because of numbers or coming because of we want to have good numbers on Sunday morning. It's because we believe, and we in our heart of hearts, that when we come together as a body of believers, we get to experience Christ. And the last time I checked, that's one of the things we love the most. Of course, I could be wrong. But anyway, I'm sorry. Back to my lesson. Anyway, so the third time we come in contact with Thomas is that everyone's there except for Thomas. Jesus shows up, shows him the scars, shows him that he's real, and the first thing that happens, and he gives him the commission to go and tell others that he's, the gospel, the Great Commission. And the first thing they do is they say, "Hey, we got to let Thomas know. We got to let Thomas in on this." So they go get Thomas, and they grab Thomas up, and they find Thomas. And as soon as they see Thomas, they say, "We have seen Jesus. He is alive." And surely Thomas would have experienced the same joy they felt, but instead Thomas has issues. He looks at the disciples, and I don't know if it was an angry tone or if it was just a bold statement, but he says in verse 25, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and I put my fingers where the nails were, and I put my hand into his side, I will not believe." Now, be honest with yourself. Was Thomas's reaction really that unexpected? I don't think so. I mean, we've concluded that Thomas loved Jesus. All of his hopes, all of his dreams, all these ideas of something new, a new congregation, a new way of doing things, a new way of worshiping, a new way of coming in contact with Christ. All that stuff led up to something that wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to die. And like a lot of people, when someone goes away, that's the end. That's the end. In fact, we can honestly say that many of us are a lot like Thomas. Because unless we see something with our own eyes, or we hold it in our hands, we have a hard time believing some things. We can't believe something unless we touch it, see it, smell it, taste it. But yet, that's what the gospel is all about. The gospel is about faith. The gospel is about hope. Our faith comes from not seeing, but from experiencing things in our hearts. And wouldn't it be very interesting to know what the next 8 days were like for Thomas? The next 8 days, that probably were, well, I'm sure he got made fun of. I'm sure the disciples, joking around said, all right, when he comes, you're going to see. When he gets here, you just wait. When Jesus comes, you just wait. You just wait. Everybody was happy, making plans. But Thomas was miserable. In his mind, Jesus was dead. In his unwillingness to open his heart, unwillingness to accept faith, he missed out on a lot of things that happened when the Messiah rose from the dead. However, the day did pass. And once again, all of them are together. And this time, Thomas is there. And Jesus appears to him just like he did before, says the exact same words he said before, peace be with you, and without missing a beat, Jesus goes right up to Thomas and says, hey, Thomas, put your hand here. Put your finger here. Put your hand on my side, Thomas. Let's get this out of the way. Let's get this done. We've got things to do. Stop doubting and start believing. And when that happens, Thomas makes one of the best statements we will ever read about in the Bible. He says, my Lord and my God. Thomas is standing in the presence of a resurrected, living Jesus. He had been dead, and now he is alive. What is he supposed to do? Should he fall down and kiss his feet? Should he cry? Should he shout for joy? What is he going to do? I believe Thomas does the only thing he can do in response to what he has just seen. My Lord and my God. And so Thomas is now no longer a doubter. Thomas is Thomas the witness. Think about this. For the first time in the Bible, Jesus is called God. He has been called a lot of things. He's been called Lord, Teacher, Son of David. He's been called the Messiah. He's been called the Christ. He's even been called the Son of God. But the one who just doubted a few verses ago comes up with becoming the greatest witness and gives the greatest witness statement of all. He proclaimed, He is my Lord, He is my God. So, you decide. Was Thomas a failure? It's real easy. It's real easy for us to scold Thomas for his doubt, for his lack of faith. But when we do, we must also reprimand ourselves. There's not a person in this room who have had moments of doubt. There's not a person in this room who have sat down by themselves and may not have said it, but has probably thought about it. Sometimes this Bible and the things that in this Bible, this is hard stuff to comprehend. This is hard stuff to chew on. I'll even go one step further. There are many of us who have not yet allowed other people in this congregation to move on past the titles of doubt. We get someone in here, we get them all nice and set up. Next thing you know, they miss a couple of Sundays or they've been gone for a while, they make one mistake, and we automatically brand them and we never do let them forget it. When's that going to change? When's that going to change? Instead of calling Thomas a doubter, perhaps we should make him the best example of all. We need to have a love like Thomas that is so deep and so sincere that we'd be willing to risk it all and go die with Christ. We need the courage of someone who would allow us to follow Christ where it may lead. We need to pray that we would have the inquiring mind to know more about Christ and know exactly what He was doing and where He's going. And most of all, regardless of our moments of doubt, we do not need to be afraid to witness and claim that Jesus is God. He's our Lord, and He's our God. Someone wrote a poem, and it goes like this. It's a little bitty thing. Doubt sees obstacles. Faith sees the way. Doubt sees the darkest night. Faith sees the day. Doubt dreads to take a step. Faith soars on high. Doubt questions who believes. Faith answers, I. Stop doubting, Jesus said. Start believing. And that's the statement that Jesus makes to all of us. It's a statement that He wants us to know. And with all the other questions and things about baptism and salvation and everything else, I saw a really great article or video today. It says, why do you need to ask? If they did it in the Bible at the beginning of the new church, why are we asking all these questions? Why aren't we just doing it like they did it? Well, how they did it was the same thing as we try to do today. We extend an offer. And we say, today is the day that you can become a Christian. Today is the day that you can give your life to Christ. And we have water, and we will baptize you, and we will take your confession, and you will walk out those doors a brand new Christian. Today is the day that you can recommit yourself to Christ. And say, for one more week, I'm going to do my best to live the life that Jesus wants me to live so I can show Christ and others. Today is the day that we will be more than happy to pray for you. We would be love for anyone to have just to share something good that has happened to them this week and how God has worked in your life. We would love for that to happen as well. Whatever your need is today, we want to offer the invitation. Please come forward as we stand and as we sing. Amen.